Is it possible that an architect's greatest masterpiece is not the building he designed for a client, but the place where he chose to live and think and fail and begin again? That question sits at the center of any honest look at Frank Lloyd Wright, because while the world remembers him for Fallingwater or the Guggenheim, the two properties he built for himself, Taliesin in Wisconsin and Taliesin West in Arizona, may reveal more about his mind than any commission ever could. These were not simply houses. They were laboratories, schools, farms, stages, and in some ways confessions built and rebuilt across nearly 5 decades, each version a record of what Wright believed architecture should be at that particular moment in his life. To understand them is to understand that for Wright, a building was never finished, it was simply paused. Wright began Taliesin in 1911, returning to the valley near Spring Green, Wisconsin, where his mother's family, the Lloyd Joneses, had settled generations earlier after emigrating from Wales. This was not a random plot of land bought for its views. It was ancestral ground, the hills his relatives had farmed, the community that had shaped his childhood summers, and building there was as much a personal statement as an architectural one. He named the estate Taliesin, a Welsh word meaning shining brow, and the name was chosen with precision rather than sentimentality. In Welsh legend, Taliesin was a poet and bard associated with radiant wisdom, but for Wright the phrase shining brow also described the exact siting of the house itself. He insisted on building not on top of the hill, which he considered an arrogant gesture, but along its brow, its shoulder, so that the structure and the land would appear to rise together rather than one dominating the other. This decision reflected an idea that would define his entire philosophy of organic architecture, the belief that a building should grow from its site as naturally as the trees and stone around it, rather than being imposed upon it. Taliesin therefore became the physical embodiment of a principle before that principle even had a widely used name. From the beginning, Taliesin was many things simultaneously. It was Wright's home, but it was also his design studio, his architectural office, his experimental workshop, and eventually his school. He used the land itself as a kind of testing ground, growing crops, raising livestock, and treating farming as inseparable from architectural thinking, since both required understanding how to work with natural systems rather than against them. The buildings changed constantly because Wright refused to think of Taliesin as complete. Walls were removed and rebuilt, roof lines were reconsidered, new wings appeared as his family situation, his finances, or simply his evolving taste demanded it. This constant transformation was accelerated, tragically, by disaster. In 1914, a devastating fire, deliberately set during a period of profound personal turmoil in Wright's life, destroyed much of the living quarters and resulted in multiple deaths, an event that shocked the nation and could easily have ended Wright's career and his connection to the site altogether. Yet he rebuilt, creating what is often referred to as Taliesin II, adjusting the plan, reinforcing certain structures, and continuing to develop the property as though the tragedy had become, however painfully, part of its architectural narrative. Then in 1925, another fire, this time caused by an electrical fault, again destroyed portions of the home, leading to yet another reconstruction that became known as Taliesin III, the version that forms the core of what visitors see today, though even that version continued to be altered until Wright's death in 1959. This pattern of destruction and renewal is essential to understanding Taliesin, because it transformed the estate from a static architectural object into something closer to a living organism, one that absorbed catastrophe and kept evolving rather than freezing into a museum piece. It is difficult to think of another architectural work in history that so literally embodies resilience, as both a philosophical stance and a lived reality. In 1932, in the depths of the Great Depression, Wright and his wife Olga founded the Taliesin Fellowship, an apprenticeship program that transformed the estate once again, this time into a full architectural school unlike any that existed before it. Young apprentices arrived from across the country and eventually across the world, paying tuition not simply to study architectural drawing in a classroom, but to live entirely within Wright's orbit. They farmed the land, cooked meals, performed construction labor, staged theatrical and musical performances, and worked directly on Wright's active architectural commissions, learning through direct participation rather than passive instruction. This was education as immersion, a deliberate rejection of the increasingly academic and theoretical architectural training being offered at universities of the period. Apprentices might spend a morning laying stone for a new wing of Taliesin, an afternoon drafting details for a client's residence under Wright's direct supervision, and an evening rehearsing a piece of music or attending one of Wright's famously opinionated lectures on culture, philosophy, and the failures of modern civilization. The fellowship blurred the line between labor and learning so completely that Taliesin functioned simultaneously as home, farm, office, theater, and university, a convergence of functions that mirrored Wright's belief that architecture could never be separated from the whole of life. By the mid-1930s, however, Wright recognized that the harsh Wisconsin winters made year-round operation of the fellowship impractical, both physically and financially. Heating the sprawling stone and wood structures through sub-zero months was expensive and uncomfortable, and Wright, drawn as much by opportunity as by climate, began looking toward the American Southwest. In 1937, he established Taliesin West on a rugged parcel of desert land in the foothills near Scottsdale, Arizona, envisioning it as a winter counterpart to the Wisconsin estate, a second campus where the fellowship could continue its work without pause. Yet what began as a practical solution to a seasonal problem quickly became one of the most radical architectural experiments of Wright's career. If Taliesin in Wisconsin was about nestling into rolling green hills shaped by glacial history and agricultural tradition, Taliesin West demanded an entirely different relationship with land that offered no forgiveness, a stark Sonoran Desert landscape of saguaro cacti, granite outcrops, and blinding light. Wright and his apprentices, camping on the site in tents before any permanent structure existed, began to develop what he called desert masonry, a construction technique using local stone gathered directly from the surrounding terrain, set within angled concrete forms so that the finished walls appeared to emerge from the desert floor itself rather than being placed upon it. The color and texture of the stone matched the surrounding mountains so precisely that from a distance the buildings seemed to dissolve into the landscape, an effect Wright intended quite deliberately as an architectural argument for camouflage as harmony rather than concealment. Above these massive stone walls, Wright employed lightweight redwood framing and canvas roof panels rather than solid construction, allowing filtered desert light to pour into interior spaces while providing ventilation suited to the extreme heat, a solution that was later modified with more permanent materials as the canvas proved vulnerable to weather and time. Yet the original intention reveals how Wright treated Taliesin West as a genuine experiment rather than a finished proposal, testing materials and techniques in real conditions rather than theorizing about them from a distance. Walkways, terraces, and living spaces at Taliesin West were arranged to follow the natural contours and diagonal geometries suggested by the surrounding mountain ranges, with many structures angled precisely to align with significant petroglyphs and rock formations already present on the site, integrating the desert's own ancient markings into the architectural composition, rather than clearing them away. Comparing the two campuses side by side reveals two distinct architectural personalities, emerging from a single unified philosophy. Taliesin in Wisconsin responds to a landscape of soft curves, deep soil, and seasonal abundance, and its architecture reflects this through horizontal lines, deep overhanging eaves, and a warm material palette of local limestone and native oak that seems to grow directly from the hillside grasses. Taliesin West responds to a landscape of extremes, of harsh light and minimal vegetation and dramatic silence, and its architecture reflects this through angular geometries, low sprawling forms hugging the desert floor, and a stark palette of stone and canvas designed to filter rather than resist the sun. Yet despite these visible differences, both properties express precisely the same underlying commitment to organic architecture, the conviction that a building's form, material, and orientation must emerge from careful observation of its specific site, rather than from a predetermined style imposed indifferently upon any location. Both places also share the same refusal to be considered finished. At both campuses, Wright continued adjusting roof lines, adding terraces, reconfiguring interior spaces, and testing new construction methods literally until the year of his death, treating each property less as a completed statement and more as an ongoing conversation between architect and landscape. This continuous experimentation had enormous influence on Wright's broader body of work, since many of the ideas he tested at Taliesin and Taliesin West appeared later, refined and matured, in his commissioned projects for clients. The cantilevered terraces that would astonish visitors at Fallingwater had earlier antecedents in structural experiments conducted at Taliesin in Wisconsin. The dramatic use of natural stone integrated directly into architectural walls, blurring the boundary between building and geology, was tested repeatedly at both Taliesin properties before appearing in numerous later residential commissions across the country. Even Wright's late-career masterpiece, the Guggenheim Museum in New York, with its insistence on continuous flowing space rather than segmented rooms, echoes ideas about spatial fluidity that had been explored for decades within the ever-shifting floor plans of Taliesin itself. In this sense, both properties functioned as something closer to laboratories than showpieces, spaces where Wright could fail privately before succeeding publicly, testing new structural ideas, material combinations, and spatial arrangements on himself and his apprentices before ever proposing them to a paying client. This willingness to experiment on his own home rather than only on the homes of others reveals a level of architectural conviction that is genuinely rare, since most architects reserve their boldest ideas for clients willing to fund them, while Wright treated his own life as the ultimate testing ground for his beliefs. It would be incomplete, however, to discuss Taliesin without acknowledging the profound human tragedy embedded within its history, since the story of these buildings cannot be separated from the story of the lives lived and lost within them. The 1914 fire and its associated deaths occurred during an emotionally turbulent chapter of Wright's personal life, following his controversial departure from his first marriage, and the tragedy brought intense public scrutiny and personal devastation that might have permanently derailed another architect's career. The 1925 fire brought further loss and financial strain during a period when Wright was already struggling professionally, his reputation having suffered through the economic hardships of the era and shifting public tastes in architecture. Rebuilding after each disaster required not only physical reconstruction but genuine emotional resilience, and Wright's decision to continue living and working on the same land, rather than abandoning it for a location untouched by tragedy, speaks to a complicated but undeniable devotion to the place his ancestors had settled generations before him. Rather than allowing these tragedies to define Taliesin as a site of loss, Wright consistently framed each reconstruction as an opportunity for architectural renewal, treating destruction almost as an unwelcome but ultimately productive catalyst for reinvention. This does not erase the genuine pain embedded in the site's history, but it does illuminate how thoroughly Wright's architectural philosophy of continuous evolution extended even into his response to personal catastrophe, transforming devastating setbacks into occasions for reconsidering and improving the very spaces that had been destroyed. By the time of Wright's death in 1959, both Taliesin properties had become something far larger than personal residences, having evolved into living archives of nearly 5 decades of architectural thought, each wall and terrace representing a specific moment in an ongoing intellectual and creative process. The Taliesin Fellowship itself continued operating for decades afterward, eventually evolving into a formal architecture school that trained generations of architects directly within the same spaces where Wright had once taught, ensuring that the pedagogical model of learning through direct labor and daily immersion persisted well beyond his lifetime. Today, both properties are preserved as National Historic Landmarks and operate as museums offering guided tours, allowing visitors from around the world to walk through spaces that once served simultaneously as home, office, farm, and classroom, experiencing firsthand how thoroughly Wright merged every dimension of daily life into a single continuous architectural experiment. Walking through Taliesin in Wisconsin, visitors encounter low doorways deliberately compressed to heighten the dramatic release of space beyond them, a technique Wright called compression and release, alongside windows positioned to frame specific views of the surrounding hills as though each opening were a carefully composed photograph, rather than a simple aperture for light. Walking through Taliesin West, visitors encounter similar compressions and releases adapted for desert conditions, terraces oriented to capture cooling breezes, and interior spaces that transition seamlessly into outdoor courtyards, blurring the boundary between shelter and landscape so thoroughly that it becomes difficult to determine where the architecture ends and the desert begins. Both experiences reinforce the same fundamental lesson, that Wright never separated the practice of architecture from the practice of living, treating every meal prepared, every crop harvested, every apprentice trained, and every fire endured as material contributing to an architectural philosophy that could never be fully separated from his own biography. So we return to the question posed at the beginning, whether an architect's greatest legacy lies in a single perfected masterpiece, or in an entire way of thinking that continues to influence others long after the architect himself is gone. Judged purely by conventional standards, neither Taliesin nor Taliesin West represents architectural perfection in the way Fallingwater or the Guggenheim are often described, since both properties remain perpetually unfinished, repeatedly damaged, endlessly modified, and shaped as much by personal tragedy and financial necessity as by pure design intention. Yet perhaps this incompleteness is precisely what makes them Wright's most honest architectural statement, since finished masterpieces can only ever represent a single moment of an architect's thinking frozen in time, while these two ever-evolving properties reveal the actual process of thought itself, unfolding continuously across nearly 5 decades of experimentation, failure, rebuilding, and renewal. In this sense, Wright's true masterpiece may not be any single building at all, but rather the demonstrated conviction that architecture is never truly finished, that a building can remain a living, changing, evolving project for as long as its creator remains willing to keep questioning it. If that idea resonates with how you think about architecture and the spaces we build for ourselves rather than for others, consider subscribing to UrbArchitect for more explorations like this one, and feel free to leave a comment sharing which of the 2 Taliesins you would choose to walk through first, the shining brow of the Wisconsin hills or the quiet stone laboratory rising from the Arizona desert.